Good evening to all. Wow, what a room, full. It's amazing to see you here. Let me wish you a very warm welcome to this conference. We're very happy, of course, that there's so much interest in, I was going to say the commemoration, but really the celebration of 70 years of the Asian-African Conference that took place in Bandung, Indonesia. Now, I think there was no better day than to celebrate this than today, because as you all know, today is a very special day in international history. 50 years ago, the Vietnamese people liberated Saigon, liberated and freed their country, and ended 20 years of US war against the country, criminal war, but not only 20 years of US war, but 100 years of colonialism. This is a moment of hope still today for the peoples of the South and the North. So let's also take a moment to applaud them. Today, however, and you know that the world remains shaped by political and economic structures that are rooted in colonial exploitation and injustice. Palestine is today the symbol, the flashpoint of colonialists and imperialists, not just domination, but genocide. And we are at a crossroads where we see here in Europe all of the complicity of Europe with the genocide in Palestine. And we see that in an international world where things are shifting very quickly, Europe chooses to militarize. And then there's a debate. Should we be a militarized lapdog of the United States? Or some other tendencies saying maybe we should be a militarized imperialist power of our own. And that is why it's so relevant to reflect today on the lessons of Bandung. Because Bandung showed there is an alternative. It showed that countries can choose for independence from power blocks, for peaceful coexistence and development. And Europe today has much to learn from the countries of the South and from this history. Therefore, we know Bandung was first and foremost the voice of the South. And therefore tonight we want to give a central role, central place to voices from the Global South this evening. But before we go to our excellent panelists, let me also thank our conveners of tonight, all people representing strong voices against imperialism and for justice. And of course, this evening could not be complete without a strong voice from Indonesia and from the working class of Indonesia. I'm speaking about Said Iqbal, who's the president of, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, and probably not, but Partai Buruh, the Indonesian Labour Party. But in the first place, a very well-known and respected labor leader and the president of the KSPI, the Trade Union Federation of Indonesia. So before we kick all of this off, let's listen to his video message that he kindly agreed to send to us all tonight. Thank you very much.
Saya Said Iqbal, Presiden Partai Buruh, sekaligus Presiden Konfederasi Serikat Pekerja Indonesia atau KSPI dari Indonesia. Melalui kesempatan ini, Partai Buruh di Indonesia, mewakili buruh Indonesia, konstituen Partai Buruh Indonesia, mengucapkan selamat yang menyelenggarakan peringatan Konferensi Asia Afrika di Belgia. Dalam kesempatan peringatan tersebut adalah momentum untuk menggali, mengingatkan kembali bahwa nilai-nilai perlawanan terhadap neokapitalisme neoliberalisme yang mengancam masa depan kaum buruh, upah murah, penggunaan sistem kerja outsourcing atau precarious work yang mengakibatkan eksploitasi kaum buruh, pekerja anak, dan juga sistem jaminan sosial yang belum memadai, dan kerja-kerja paksa di beberapa belahan dunia ini, khususnya di negara berkembang, adalah telah membuat kemiskinan, pengangguran, dan penderitaan. Semangat Asia Afrika adalah membangkitkan kembali perlawanan tersebut. Partai Buruh di Indonesia mendukung perayaan yang diselenggarakan sekaligus tindakan-tindakan yang akan diambil oleh harapan kami dengan peringatan-peringatan ini tidak berhenti di seremonial, tapi kita melakukan tindakan bersama, membangun solidaritas internasional, membangun sosialisme internasional, membangun partai-partai buruh, sosial demokrat, partai sosialis yang ada di seluruh dunia bersatu kembali melawan neokapitalisme, neoliberalisme. Mereka tidak boleh berkuasa di muka bumi dengan kekuasaannya yang merasa benar. Kita harus mengimbangi kekuasaan daripada yang mereka coba lakukan. Seperti yang dilakukan oleh Trump dengan menggunakan kebijakan tarifnya untuk menghantam perdagangan internasional sehingga PHK atau pemutusan hubungan kerja di mana-mana. Harapan kami, tahun depan atau tahun-tahun ke depan, peringatan Asia Afrika oleh partai-partai buruh di seluruh dunia, dimotori oleh Belgium Labour Party dan Partai Buruh di Indonesia, bisa kita selenggarakan di Bandung, di Indonesia. Hidup buruh, teruslah hidup dalam perjuangan kaum buruh. Terima kasih.
Hello. 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 Good evening, everyone. How is everyone doing? It's really nice to see such a packed room for tonight. And I'm very happy to be here hosting this event, such an important commemoration. And I'm also very excited to announce our panelists for today. Who are going to talk a bit about what are the spirit of the Bandung today and where are we heading to in such a chaotic and tense world right now. And I'm Juliana, and I hope that you will enjoy this evening and hopefully also leave this room with some inspiration to continue the struggle against imperialism. So I would like to invite now our panelists. So a big round of applause for Peter Mertens, Secretary General of the Workers' Party of Belgium, Deputy of the Belgian Federal Parliament and author of many books, including his latest one called Mutiny. I would also like to invite Varsha Gandikota. She's the co-coordinator of Progressive International. And also chairperson of the Hague Group, which is a group of nations from the Global South that support the proceedings against Israel before the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Now our third speaker, Vijay Prashad. He is the executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, author, journalist, and historian. And so I'm just going to briefly explain the plan for tonight. Each of our speakers are going to do a brief introduction on what the spirit of Bandung represents today. And then the idea is to have a bit of an interaction And later on, we're gonna have time for your questions. And so yeah, let's just jump into our discussion.
You don't want me to sing. Okay, thank you for inviting us also on this beautiful day and this beautiful moment in the commemoration of Bandung. And I wanted just to tell a little story, not to give a big speech, but a little story about two people. And I will start immediately. I don't think Irawan Suyono and Jan Maassen ever knew each other. Yet they were both active in the Dutch resistance against the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. Irawan Suyono, he studied sociology at the University of Leiden, the Netherlands, and he was a member of the progressive nationalist and anti-colonial student movement, Perhimpunan Indonesia, or PI for short. It's much more easy for me, PI. And so when the Germans invaded the Netherlands, Irawan joined the resistance in the Netherlands against the German occupation, like a lot of Indonesian students in the Netherlands at that time. Also, his sister, Suchami, she joined the resistance. She helped people hiding, and they were active in distributing liberation papers like De Bevrijding, Liberation in English. And their motto was very clear, printed in their paper, and it was saying, first liberate the Netherlands, then liberate Indonesia. Eerst de bevrijding van Nederland en dan de bevrijding van Indonesië. On January 13th, of 1945, there was a Raja in Leiden at the university, and he was arrested, Irawan was arrested and shot dead, and they found the stencil machine on him. He was carrying the stencil machine. It was just being repaired, and it was just being prepared also for the next edition of the Liberation magazine. So Irawan gave his life for the liberation of the Netherlands. But after the Netherlands were liberated, the Netherlands bourgeoisie kept colonizing Indonesia. And when Japan surrendered in 1945, you know that Mohammed Hatta and Sukarno proclaimed Indonesia's independence. Mohammed Hatta also studied in Leiden together with Irawan Suyono. And the Dutch elite, they were furious on this declaration of independence. And what did they do? They sent tens of thousands of young people go to Indonesia, Dutch people, young people, to oppress the liberation movement. And so young men that just had liberated the Netherlands against oppression of the Nazis, were now sent, the same men, the same young people, to oppress another people. And which is not very much known is that a lot of these young people refused to go to the Indonesia. They refused, like Jan Maassen. Jan Maassen was a young worker of Amsterdam, and he said, no, I won't go to Indonesia to oppress another people. It's my principle. He was a young worker. What did they do with Jan Maassen? They threw him in jail. And he was in the same jail where a little bit before the SS officers were held. But these SS officers in jail in Holland, they gave them pardon. They never gave pardon to Jan Maassen. Never. He was being put out, he lost his civil rights for his life, and he never received rehabilitation. So Irawan Suyono and Jan Maassen, two people, an Indonesian student who was helping to liberate the Netherlands, and a young worker from the Netherlands who was helping to liberate Indonesia. Two movements merging into one with Irawan and Jan, the mutinies of the South and the North joined hands. The rest we know. Ultimately, the Dutch and British had to give up the fight, and Indonesia became independent and free, like India and Pakistan in 1947, like Sri Lanka and Myanmar in 1949, and of course like China in 1949. Our nations and countries are no longer colonies. We are now free, sovereign. independent. We are once again masters in our own house. With these words, President Sukarno opened the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in April 1955. And so Bandung became a turning point, a moment when the world order shifted. Country after country break free from the chain of the European domination. And as Asia tore itself away from Europe, the power shifted to the United States by dropping atomic bombs on Japan, by waging war in Korea, and later in Vietnam. And against this backdrop, leaders of 29 countries gathered in Bandung, and for the first time the Global South stood together, not as colonies, but as equals. They challenged the racist, Eurocentric world order. They inspired liberation movements in Algeria and in Kenya. They inspired Patrice Lumumba. They inspired Pierre Mulele in Congo. They empowered the struggles against apartheid in South Africa. So Bandung was not just a diplomatic event. Bandung was a movement, something fluid, something elusive, a global quest for independence and for equality. And today we are 70 years after Bandung. Economic power is now shifting towards Asia. And Irawan, he went in his time, in the 20s of the last century, studying in Leiden. And perhaps today Irawan would have gone to China, where the most modern universities thrive and the greatest technological advances are made. Or maybe Irawan today, he would have stayed in Indonesia, which has since short joined the BRICS countries, and he would have studied in the Institute Technologique Bandung, the Bandung's Technological University. Who can say? What is certain is that after 5 centuries of Western domination, the economic center of gravity is going to Asia. And that makes a huge difference. We are not longer in 1955. We are in 2025. We are in the year of DeepSeek. We are in the year of BYD. We are in the year of India's first planned manned space flight. And never in history, there's some space fans in the room, thank you. Or BYD fans, it's also possible. But it is certain, never in the history Washington faced such challenges, neither economically, neither technologically. And hence Trump regime is now dragging the world more into a new Cold War and stoking hatred against China. And just as they once tried to turn the world against the decolonization movement and against the spirit of Bandung. But the world has changed. From the Bandung Conference emerged a powerful movement, a non-aligned movement, the NMAM. And this movement was politically very strong. It had a clear, outspoken anti-imperialist program, knew what it stood for and what it fought against. But economically, it was different. It was much more difficult. They were kept small under unfair imperialist rules still. And today, maybe the picture is reversed. Look at the BRICS countries today. They now organize to strengthen South-South trade, and they are economically much more stronger today. But politically, it's much more difficult for these countries today. That's the changing situation. I don't know if Irawan and Jan ever met in the Dutch resistance. I don't know. But perhaps they will meet tomorrow. Perhaps they will meet today. Perhaps today, Irawan is a Palestine student somewhere in the world organizing the student movements, the encampments, I don't know where in the world. These are the Irawans of today. Perhaps the Irawans of today are rescuing the honor of all Democrats in Washington, in Berlin, in Brussels, and in Paris. And perhaps Jan today is one of these young organizers of the trade union movement to resist against the social cuts and to resist against militarization. Perhaps there are a lot of Jans today, thousands of Jans today, that want to throw open the windows in the class struggle of the North. Because one thing, dear comrades and friends, is certain. If Jan and Irawan join hands, they are strong. If Jan and Irawan join hands, they are strong. If they fight together for a world without exploitation and without oppression, a world as it should be, a socialist world, then the future is bright. In the words I will conclude of Sukarno, and I quote, "Yes, we live in a world of fear, but do not let fear guide you. Let yourself be guided by hope, by determination, by ideals, and yes, by dreams." End of the quote of Sukarno. Comrades, friends, some dreams are worth fighting for. Bandung is not yesterday, Bandung is tomorrow. Thank you.
Hello? Yeah, well, that was a good way to start. Varsha, if you would like now, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Peter, for that excellent opening for this evening. And thank you to everyone who's come here today. I'm always surprised when I see packed halls at these things, because so often you're told that these are dusty old documents, dusty old diplomatic meetings that no one really talks about, that no one really cares about, stuck in the annals of history. And every now and then I'm in rooms like this, which remind me that they're living and breathing spirit that does move each of us in different movements around the world. When I was walking into this room, I was thinking about when was the last time I was in Brussels and in Belgium, and it was actually when you were debating your reparations commission, which was really active last year, so I think towards the end of last year, October, November. And I remember reading the newspapers and media coverage at the time, and on the one hand, some media articles made it seem like, and really this was the case in Europe and in North America, that everywhere we were winning reparations for slavery, for stolen artifacts, that really reparations was this active demand that was somehow being accepted by liberals, by centrists, by the right wing, and this was the fear, right? On the other hand, you had people saying, but why should we pay? Yes, of course, these things were bad. Colonialism was terrible, but why on earth should we pay? And here in Brussels, I think it was Flemish rebel Maggie de Block who said, why should all Belgians pay today? And the underlying sentiment, whichever hand you might be reading, is that however bad neocolonialism might be, however bad things might be today, surely things are not as bad as the outright horrors of colonialism of eras past. And that reminded me of what Sukarno said when at the Bandung meeting, of course, 70 years ago, where he walks in and one of the first proclamations is to say, colonialism is not dead. So to understand the spirit of Bandung, I think we'd have to first ask, what is the spirit of colonialism? Is that still alive? Has it morphed shape and form? Or is it truly dead and we're discovering a different kind of spirit of Bandung now in resistance? For me, that answer lies in a lot of the travels and work that the Progressive International and I've done over the last few years. And I want to share a few of those learnings. If you look at Honduras today, small Caribbean island, I don't know how many of you in the audience have even been to that part of the world. If you go to Honduras today, you'll see that the government is fighting a $10.3 billion lawsuit, which is, by the way, for a country as small as Honduras, something equivalent to 2/3 of its annual national budget or 1/3 of its entire GDP. What on earth could be a legal case the size of $10.3 billion, right? It's because Honduras decided to take its own land back. Back before there was a socialist government in power, you had a bunch of crypto billionaires, including, of course, everyone's favorite, Elon Musk's best friend, Palantir's co-founder, PayPal's co-founder, who decided we want a libertarian paradise for billionaires. And to find this libertarian paradise, to set up this micronation free from what they claim from the reach of government, but really also free from the reach of the residents themselves, of the people who already lived on that island, they showed up on this beautiful island of Roatan in Honduras and said, we're going to build a libertarian paradise here. And libertarian paradise really in every sense of the word, a micronation free from the reach of everyone in every sense of the word, in that they set up Bitcoin as the official currency of the island. They make voting proportionate to the amount of property that you own. And when, of course, the local fishing community protests, they shut off electricity and shut off water supply. Naturally, there's resistance. There's a new political party and a new movement that says this is our land, and if we win power, we are going to take this back. And they do. Xiomara Castro, the first woman president of Honduras, the first woman socialist president of Honduras, through a unanimous vote in the parliament, abolishes this charter city idea and takes its land back. And immediately, Honduras is hit with a $10.8 billion lawsuit through what's called the ISDS system, Investor State Dispute Settlement, which is a clause that's baked into every single free trade agreement, every single bilateral investment treaty that any global South country has with a global North country, where if you try as a new government, as a socialist government, as really even a center government that's trying to do something for its people, boom, you have an instant lawsuit come in by transnational companies for loss of future profits. And this isn't unique to Honduras. You go to Zimbabwe, what you'll see is a city, the capital city, Harare, in complete shambles, where the currency doesn't mean anything anymore. Parts of the country have switched to a barter system because of how much it's been devalued. And that's because it's been under sanctions. Nearly 4 decades of sanctions by countries from this part of the world, from Europe, from the United States. And I'm not sure how many would even be able to tell you why Zimbabwe is under sanctions. First, we don't even know that it is because no media reports on it, and no one would be able to tell you why it is under sanctions. And that goes back once again to back when it was Rhodesia. Back when it was Rhodesia and under British colonial rule, no black natives could own land in Zimbabwe. They created 10% of the land, called them native reserves, and said, you can own this land. The rest of it is for the white settler population to grow their farms in, and all the arable land was limited to them. So, of course, when you had the independence movement, Zimbabweans said, yeah, we're taking our land back. And they won independence and had what's arguably, I think, one of the largest land reform programs since the Cold War anywhere in the world. The response? Instant sanctions from the European Union, from the United States, because they find it terrifying that people of the Global South could attempt to take their land back. Again, in this scenario, it's not new. You look at modern-day examples. At the start of last year, I found myself once again near Brussels, in your neighboring city in The Hague in the Netherlands, at the International Court of Justice with South Africa's historic genocide convention case against Israel. And it was incredible being in that room. You know, I don't know how many of you have seen the Peace Palace. By the way, sorry? I'm South African. Yes. More power to you. Thank you, Tlaleng. Thank you for everything you've done. You know, when the South African delegation walked into the Peace Palace and I walked in with them, I remember looking around. It's called the Great Hall inside the Peace Palace. It's actually not great at all. The hall is quite small. But if you look around, it has these beautiful glass windows all around, stained glass windows, right? Turns out it's a $1.3 million donation from Andrew Carnegie. And it's supposed to depict what they call the ideal of progress, the progress of law. And if you look into what that idea of progress is, it's the civilized nation sharing and exporting the ideas of justice, which turns out the rest of us didn't have, and we're stuck in primitivity on these stained glass windows, And I remember looking around and going, this is so strange, because me as an Indian certainly can't see myself in these stained glass windows. Neither could the South Africans, nor could the Irish lawyers who were working with us. But here we were in this institution that was so clearly not meant for us to be on this side of the aisle. It was clearly built only for us to be persecuted and prosecuted, not for us to actually bring a Western-backed criminal into the court and actually hold them to account. But what happens when South Africa does that? Netanyahu, that day when we walked out of the International Court of Justice after the hearing, put out a press conference and announced, nobody can stop us, not even The Hague. And that turned out to be so unfortunately prescient and true that nobody truly could stop him, can stop him till now, and not even The Hague. And South Africa once again found itself at the end of unilateral punishment. Immediately, there was a bill in the US House of Representatives that many of you would remember, putting all United States and South Africa's bilateral relations under review. And of course, now you've got the direct eye of Elon Musk on South Africa, punishing them through aid, through cutting them out of trade deals, any and all forms of coercive action. Why am I telling you all of these stories, taking you around what is a rather grim tour of the world, going from continent to continent? It's really to say that every single time the South has attempted to take its own land back, take its own trade back, take its own institutions back, the punishment comes swiftly and surely. Whether it's in the form of sanctions, whether it's in the form of cutting off of aid, it comes surely from the global North, proving to us that the Northern aggression, as it was during the Cold War times, has always been about economic sovereignty for the South, to stop the economic sovereignty in the South so that you could have capital accumulation in the core by taking it away from the periphery. So if the spirit of Bandung is about the desire to be free, the spirit of freedom, the spirit of liberty, that's always existed. The global South and the people of the global South have forever been in a perpetual struggle to be free. But for me, the spirit of Bandung is something slightly greater than that, something more creative, which is about being free together, being free collectively, which is really what animated that moment of Bandung, in that moment where multiple national liberation struggles across the South came together. And I think we may disagree on this in the panel about how optimistic or pessimistic we are on where that spirit of Bandung, where that mood of Bandung might be today. But for me, having had the great honor of launching the Hague Group just 2 months ago, which is 9 nations across 3 continents coming together: Malaysia, South Africa, Senegal, Namibia, Colombia, Bolivia, Honduras, and Cuba, to say, you know what? Israel cannot go unpunished. We, as Global South nations, refuse to be complicit with our lands, with our factories, with our ports in the genocide against our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and formed the first diplomatic bloc against the genocide in Palestine, and to hold the country of Israel and Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and every single criminal accountable for their crimes. They announced 3 measures at the end of January 2025. They say, if any of these criminals set foot in our airspace, in our soil, we promise to arrest them. Not actually a radical thing to say, but clearly is radical in the face of your government here turning its back on international law, your neighboring government next door making up rules with Macron saying heads of state have immunity, and of course, even more of your neighbors like Hungary and Poland openly, brazenly saying, who wants the ICC and the ICJ? Anyway, let's give that up. In the face of that, it's actually the South, the governments of conscience from the global South, holding up multilateralism, holding up international law and saying, we will be responsible for the defense of humanity. And they make 2 more proclamations which are extremely clear. We will not export arms, we will not send military equipment, we will not send jet fuel, either from our factories or through our ports, because we refuse to let our land and our labor be used against other people. Very much, Peter, the spirit of the story that you began this evening with. So for me, once again, as I stand here today, thinking about the spirit of Bandung, that's really where I do find the spirit of Bandung, that it inspires me, which is to say that the struggles that we have today and the problems that we have today aren't just about the South alone. We're in an apocalyptic edge where we know that it's internationalism or extinction. But the answers for that internationalism or extinction are coming to us from a fiery and an insurgent South. And that's where we have to look if we have to be very clear about what the terms of the debate are. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's another great intervention. And I have to say that I was one of them who didn't know that Zimbabwe was under sanctions. So, yeah, and it also made me think a bit on when Trump announced his trade war. and the reaction that governments in Europe they had, and also as coming from a country from the global south, I was a bit like, okay, we've been experiencing this for a long time. This is nothing new for us, and yeah, to see the contrast between countries from the global south and global north, which you pointed out very well. So last but not least, Vijay, you're next.
Well, in many ways, this is my home. Because some of you may know that I'm a lifetime member of COMAC. And so, very difficult. Once a COMAC, always a COMAC. And then last time I was here at Manifiesta, somebody handed me a Red Fox card. So I'm not sure about that yet. I haven't been through the Red Fox initiation. But certainly once a COMAC, always a COMAC. It's really interesting and important that the Party Buru was the first to speak and welcome us here and remind us that Indonesia is where Bandung started. It's very important, and it's so important what Marc said about today being the day that the Vietnamese defeated the United States. It was an incredible, incredible war that the Vietnamese fought on behalf of the subjugated peoples all around the world. I grew up in the 1970s as a little kid taken to demonstrations, and the chant has never left my mind. Amar naam, tomar naam, Vietnam. My name, your name, Vietnam. And I remember being a little boy taken by my mother to the inauguration of a statue in Calcutta where I grew up. Now, it was unfortunate for the United States and British High Commission to be on the same street. It was known as Harrington Street, an old colonial official, minor official. Well, the government of West Bengal, a center-left government, decided to change the name of the street during the war. And they changed the name of the street and put up a bust, a statue of Ho Chi Minh at the end of the street, and the street was called Ho Chi Minh Street. So the American consulate, even now, even today, has to write US consulate Ho Chi Minh Sarani, Calcutta. What I would ask you, people who live in the city where Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, is if there is any Israeli building in this city, fight like hell to change the name and name it Ghassan Kanafani Street in honor of the great Ghassan Kanafani. Amar naam, tomar naam, Vietnam. What a strong statement. Little bit like the Bandung spirit. Bandung is the third largest city in Indonesia. Most people who know about Bandung don't know that it's actually a city. They think it's like a fantastical being that flies across the third world, captivating the imagination. Or at least they used to know that. In our childhood, Bandung was actually a word. Streets were named after the leaders at Bandung. New Delhi's diplomatic enclave had a Sukarno Street, Gamal Abdul Nasser Street. Later, even though he was not at Bandung, my great hero, Kwame Nkrumah Street. And then for a time, they couldn't remove those names for years and years. Then slowly the names fell out of favor, different names appeared. But for us, in my generation, Bandung still had that resonance. What it meant was very much what Mao Zedong said at the speech he gave at Tiananmen Square after the great Chinese Revolution. When Mao Zedong said the Chinese people have stood up. What Bandung represented to people in black pajamas was that the colonized have stood up. It was Mao's line generalized across, at least in that period, Asia and Africa. And we waited after 1955. We waited 4 more years for the Cuban Revolution. Because only after the Cuban Revolution did Latin America join this process at the formation of the non-aligned movement in 1961. And after 1961, after the Cuban Revolution, it was Asia, Africa, Latin America. Cuba's revolution is an integral part of the spirit of Bandung, even though it happens 4 years later. When you say Bandung, you think of Fidel Castro standing up at the non-aligned meetings, the moral heartbeat of the third world for his entire life until he died just over a decade ago. Fidel was the heart of the non-aligned struggle. Whether it was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when he guided us to maintain the course despite the catastrophe of the collapse of the USSR, he told us to stay the course at Rio de Janeiro in 1992 at the Earth Summit. I met him and spent several hours with him in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. Fidel said, stay the course, battle of ideas forever. Capitalism is too dangerous not to fight. Capitalism is too dangerous not to fight. Imperialism is its beast-like face. Imperialism isn't our only problem. It's what's underneath imperialism's mask. It's capitalism underneath that, which destroys the dreams of people who work so hard. As Marx showed us, workers work hard and yet they remain poor. And Marx explains in exquisite detail how, despite the fact that working people work so hard, they are unable to improve the conditions of their life by their labor. Something is going against them. It is the capitalist system, not merely this or that evil capitalist. It's not a moral critique of society. It's a fundamental critique of how society is organized politically, economically, sociologically. Underneath the bestial face of imperialism is a system of capitalism that pretends that it's normal. Never forget that. In all our anti-imperialist struggles, don't forget that workers everywhere are damaged by the brutality of ordinary capitalism, normal capitalism, capitalism that doesn't always bomb other countries, but it bombs the dreams of people who are not lazy but working hard but unable to survive. That was the spirit of Bandung. If you read the actual communique, it's a full-scale critique of society. It's a moral critique. It's a philosophical critique, an economic critique, a sociological critique. It's a critique of all aspects of society. Everything had to be lifted up and turned around. This is despite the fact that at Bandung you had conservatives, anti-communists from Ceylon, Sir John Kotelawala, anti-communist. Despite the fact that you had Fabian socialists like Jawaharlal Nehru of India. And of course, my great hero, Zhou Enlai, fresh from the Chinese Revolution of 1949, the foreign minister of China. A range of political figures, and nonetheless they agreed on a remarkable communique which said the whole world has to be changed. And the answer capitalism and imperialism gave to them was violence. First, the coup against Lumumba, 1961. The largest country in the heart of Africa was not allowed to build its own process. They had to kill Patrice Lumumba. And that's one of the reasons that this city is important for the commemoration of Bandung. because it's also in this city that the counter-revolution against Bandung was plotted, the killing of Lamola in 1961. Then in 1964, the United States engineers a coup d'etat against the liberal elected president of Brazil, João Goulart, and starts a process to overthrow every single half-decent government in Latin America. Coup after coup after coup, from Paraguay to Chile to Argentina to Uruguay, everywhere. Operation Condor. And then 10 years after Bandung, they come back to Asia. The horrendous coup against Sukarno, with 1 million communists killed in cold blood. The United States, the Australians, the British, the Netherlands government, telexing sheets after sheets after sheets of names of people that Suharto's military had to go and arrest and execute. They bathed Bandung in blood. But the spirit of Bandung did not die. It remained alive. Because 10 years after the terrible coup in Indonesia, the Vietnamese defeat the United States in Saigon and win their country back. That spirit never goes away. It's the spirit of people who do not want to live under humiliation. Today, the situation is different. At the time of Bandung, hundreds of millions of people had been mobilized in the anti-colonial movements. They are the ones who produced leaders like Sukarno, leaders like Nehru, leaders like Gamal Abdul Nasser, leaders like, for instance, Kwame Nkrumah, and then Fidel Castro. Hundreds of millions of people birthed these leaders. These leaders were accountable to mass struggles. They had an incredible subjective political orientation, high political consciousness. But the objective conditions for their program was not available. These were wretchedly poor countries unable to advance their projects. And the coups against them showed that they could not defend themselves against imperialism. Today, the situation is slightly reversed. Today, thanks to the miscalculations of capitalism, the center of gravity of the world economy has shifted to Asia. Today, China is the leading producer of high technology equipment produced by highly productive, high quality productive forces. I mean, the way Chinese technology and science has advanced, the way Indian science and technology has advanced is incredible. I mean, yesterday I took a train from Amsterdam to Breda. And I've just come back from China where I've ridden high-speed rail routinely. And I think, how is this Europe? What is happening to Germany? The locks are broken in the bathrooms of the trains. The trains keep stopping. What's happened to the infrastructure in Europe? The infrastructure in the East is quite different. Objectively, the center of gravity has shifted to the global South. But politically, our unities are not driven by hundreds of millions of people behind the political leadership. And they're not being driven by the hundreds of millions of peoples because our movements have been disarticulated like your movement. Our movements suffer because of precarity, Uberization of labor, and so on. Build the kind of mass movements necessary to make sure the spirit of Bandung is not only happening objectively but also subjectively. We need more than high-speed rail. We need to do what the Chinese have done, which is to end poverty. We need to do more than end poverty. We need to end inequality. That's a long journey. What does the West do in reaction to these advances taking place in Asia? In the 1960s, their attack on the spirit of Bandung was through coup d'etats. Today, my friends, it is much more dangerous than that. Almost 80% of global military spending is spent by the NATO plus countries. This summer in The Hague, you will have the NATO meeting. Marc Rutte, that ludicrous has-been of a politician, ludicrous has-been of a politician, sitting next to Donald Trump, Marc Rutte says, "You should come to The Hague, it's my hometown." And then he says, "I'll be so happy to host you there. We will make the NATO meeting a great demonstration of American power." But Marc, I thought NATO is an Atlantic alliance. I didn't realize it's a place for the great demonstration of American power. But no, these are servile. Your politicians are servile to the United States. However much they complain, they'll go back under the shadow of the US whenever Trump will call them. This is a very dangerous and decadent class of people. These are dangerous people. What is their answer to the shifting center of gravity to Asia? They would like to start a war with China. China does not want a war with the world. India does not want a war with anybody. Indonesia does not want a war. The United States is trying to provoke a war, a horrible war in Asia. My friends, I hope you go in the millions to greet them when they bring the NATO summit to The Hague. I hope you go in the millions. I hope you go in the millions, and I hope you tell them directly, no war in Asia. Hands off Asia. Asians don't want you. They didn't want you when you first came with the opium. They don't want you now. They don't want you. Ho Chi Minh, who died in 1969, never got to see the victory of his country over the Americans, wrote a beautiful poem toward the end of his life. He wrote, "Mountains and rivers as far as the eye can see, we don't need more space. Here's Lenin's stream. Here's Marx's mountain. With bare hands, we will build our country. With bare hands, we will build our country. Or with bare hands, we will build our world. We are not afraid of them. We will struggle, we will fight, we will win." Thanks a lot.
Well, I told you that we only had a great speaker, so I think we confirmed it now. Now we're going to have a bit of a moment of interaction, of debate, just so that we can also react on what has been said today. And to open the debate, I would like to pose a reflection on also, because through your speeches, it was clear that the collective action is needed to fight imperialism. But I feel that most of the examples that we have nowadays, they're coming from countries from the global south. And I wonder, since we are here in Belgium, what is also the role of the working class in the anti-imperialist struggle? And so I would like to know a bit from you, and how can we translate this struggle into the spirit of Bandung today? I don't know who would like to react on this first. Okay.
I mean, translating the spirit into a context like this is so easy now, because your working class is not exactly what it used to be. You know, there are migrants from all over the world who bring their complex and deep histories, family histories of struggle, generations of struggle, anti-colonial struggle. These countries are not what they were a long time ago. In fact, if you rest with Peter's speech, the Netherlands was not what people think it was in the 1940s. In fact, the anti-fascist struggle had Indonesians, as you said. So we have to also remember what the class struggle is like. Class struggle is always complicated by the social nature of the class. The classes are interesting. The last time I was here, Peter, remember the story of the worker who saw something was being mailed to Israel. I don't know, I remember, I think he's a Moroccan origin worker. He's from Morocco, Belgian worker from Morocco. He saw something being mailed to Israel. He opened the package, or he called his union representative. They opened the package, saw it had weapons shipment, and they refused to load it. And it was from this one worker's vigilance that the working class of Belgium rallied around an important anti-genocidal action. So our thoughts about what is the class struggle must always rest with the complexities of our classes. And anti-imperialist struggles sometimes are struggles fought by workers in countries like this out of their own interest, because their interest is complicated. There are family and historical reasons, but sometimes there is also broad understanding about changes in the global structure of work, and that if they don't struggle now, there will be nothing to struggle for. And we've seen that in every generation. Workers have picked up the red flag to struggle because they realize that passivity in the face of capital has never protected anybody, from the brutalities of capitalism.
You know, one of the things that I should have said when I was talking about Zimbabwe that I didn't is it's not just the sanctions from 4 decades ago that are active. If you look at what's happening in Zimbabwe right now, you'll find that they're paying, forget reparations, they're paying reverse reparations to their former colonizer families, to something to the tune of $3.5 billion. The reason they've done this is because there are former colonizer families organizing. You talk of collective action, think about collective action on the wrong side of history, organizing here in Belgium, in Brussels, in the Netherlands, for compensation for the land they lost during the land reform, land that they stole in the first place during the colonial rule of Rhodesia, and now are being supported by the Treasury in the United States, by their own governments here, by the Belgian government here, by the Dutch government in the Netherlands, to fight this case in every single institution that we think of as a global institution, whether that's the WTO, the WHO, the ISDS courts, secret corporate tribunals headquartered in Washington, D.C., inside the World Bank, and they've won it. And now the government of Zimbabwe has been forced to capitulate and pay these $3.5 billion. The payments have begun, and Belgian families from here have begun to receive nearly $20 million in payments as of October last year. Now, how does this make sense if I've just given you the story of how Harare is crumbling? The government has been forced to go take a loan from the African Development Bank in order to pay compensation to their former colonizer families because of this deal. I mean, it's so dystopic that I might as well be making this up as a part of some Noah comedy script, right? But so one, if there was a call to a certain class of people in the Global South, it's hands off, finally can we finally stop with the vengeance, with the violence that has never stopped and is a continuing stream of what we might call colonialism and neocolonialism, but really a continuous stream of violence and vengeance against the South. But the second is also, I truly believe we have to give up the illusion that there is such a thing as a socialist project within Europe that can get away with not being anti-imperialist. Look at protests for the NHS being public in the United Kingdom. Where is the money coming to fund the NHS? There is no way you can talk about the health service in the United Kingdom being public without also asking if the money is coming from BAE Systems, if the money is coming from the killing of Yemenis that has been going on and today, once again, is being debated and discussed in the United Kingdom Parliament without any support for the stopping of the vengeance and of the violence against Yemen. So every single time we speak of nationalization, every single time we speak of socialist projects within Europe, I think there's a tendency where you think of the anti-imperialist question as a second-order question. Let's nationalize our oil first, let's get better trains, let's do the green transition, and then we can deal with helping and be standing in solidarity with our comrades in the South. As a complete fallacy, there is no such thing as socialism in Europe without it being fundamentally first anti-imperialist.
Okay, about your question, it's coming from the global south only. Honestly, I really don't agree. I try to explain that in a book, etc. Really, I really do think that in countries like Belgium, like Germany, like France, like the United States, like Great Britain, there is a rage amongst the working class. There is really a rage. There is class hatred against the oppressing class. This is not one monolithic system in the global north. It does not exist. The working class is not like the Musks in the north. It is not the same. There is a class gap that is widening. And the expression of this class struggle, it is primitive. It is not politicized. It was not the same like 70 years ago. The politicization of the class struggle is on a low level, but there is class struggle, there is a rage, and that's important. But second thing I want to say about that is, I really do think that routine is a very dangerous thing, and I know 500 years of colonialism is in all of the society, not only in the justice office and in the stained glass windows of the buildings, but everywhere. Europe is built on colonialism and on blood. Wow, how to get rid of this colonial mentality? It will take some time. It will take, and it can be on a long time very conservative. But when there is a turmoil, when everything is a washing machine, you cannot follow the things can go rapidly. Also in the mind of people. We are on a moment where people can learn a lot on a short time, and things that are small can become big on a short term. We cannot act and think like the last 3 decades. It doesn't work. If you have a correct line, if you're honest, if you have good organization skills, if you want to organize workers on a new way, it can go fastly. If you talk from your heart and talk from your conviction, you can organize in a rapid way. I'm really, really convinced of that. I'm not agreeing with all this collective depression that is not possible. No, it is possible. It is possible to organize the working, also the new working class. And when we are talking about that, the working class in the 19th century, they were Uberized too. 14-hour days, they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't speak. They were fucking Uberized. They did create trade unions. They did create working class parties. They did that at that time, which was very difficult. This time is very easy compared to the 19th century to create, no, really, get real people. So we can create working class people. Last thing I want to add to that is about the double standards. I do think, for example, like, everyone in Europe is now saying we have to cut pensions, We have to cut social security. You will have to work longer than even people who can't. Their body's saying to the spirit, I can't work any longer. I'm 62, I can't be on a roof. It's not possible anymore. And this government says, no, you have to continue, because there is no alternative. And now the weapon industry said, okay, we want 800 billion euros. And everyone, wow, there was no money for pensions, there was no money for social security, there was no money for refugees, there was no money for, and there's 800 billion. So this double standards, everyone somewhere feels these double standards. Like everyone feels the double standards about, okay, we have the 11th sanction packet against Russia, and we have 0 sanction packet against Palestine. So in this turmoil, feeling about there is a standard for the ruling class, and there is a standard of the working class, there is a possibility to create a new work. I know it is difficult. I'm not naive at all. But please, a little bit confidence in ourselves, in our capacity to create from the rates of the working class.
And so my second question is, we are seeing several initiatives to resist Western hegemony, and one that has been, let's say, being more on the news lately is also not only the emergence but the enlargement of BRICS as a powerful bloc to counter Western hegemony. And I would like to know a bit from you. Do you agree? Do you see that nowadays we can say that the BRICS actually translate the spirit of Bandung, that this is the main role driving the spirit of Bandung, or how do you see it?
No, I was looking to you because Vijay, I think, has asked a question about BRICS every single fucking time he's on stage. So this time too. Look, there are two answers to whether or not BRICS translates the spirit of Bandung. If you read the Washington Post, if you read the Financial Times, if you read the Wall Street Journal, the answer is a resounding yes. Every single day there's a headline that's about, oh, BRICS spells the end of US unipolar hegemony. Is BRICS going to destroy the United States? Is BRICS the anti-NATO alliance? It's kind of, you'd really think that we'd built the most powerful institution in the world just simply based on these headlines, which are constantly stoking this fear, right? Of course, a lot of it goes back to McCarthyism. A lot of it is about stoking the fears of a new Cold War. But it really clearly irks them enough, even if it's just a symbolic threat right now, that there is another alternative that's present. On the other side, if you look at some of the leading newspapers in the Global South countries, of the countries of the BRICS themselves, we've already decided that BRICS has failed. And most of the editorial opinions go, BRICS hasn't done anything, they haven't sent out a single loan, look at them, they've already accepted all of these countries, they're not perfect, we're obviously expecting governments to be these ideal governments of conscience who come together, and every single time there's any small misstep, it spells doom for BRICS, and of course BRICS is over. I think the realistic answer is somewhere between the two, which is that it's still an extremely new formation. It's still an extremely new formation in a rapidly changing geopolitical world. I think the promise of BRICS is immense, the promise of the new development bank, even if it does nothing else other than simply give out a few loans here and there without any conditions. That would be the first time in history. The first time in history, and I really want us to think about this, right? It would be the first time in history that a multilateral institution, or really the other way around, that any developing country has received a loan without conditions put on that money, simply to develop its own population and its own land. That is a world historical moment and a world historical process. Now, that hasn't happened to the extent that we'd like it to be, but I certainly am not somebody that's going to sit here and already spell doom for an initiative that has been born against every single powerful nation allied against it and working till now, as you'll see from the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times headlines, working to destroy it from within.
Well, no. Well, my answer is on page 12 and 13 of this text. You can read it there. But, well, I just want to say that, in fact, it's true that the New Development Bank is pretty amazing. But I have to say that the German Democratic Republic, or the DDR, East Germany, the USSR, and the People's Republic of China have given many loans without conditions to build heavy industry in the third world over the last 60 years. The DDR, which was only alive for, I think, 45 years, played an immense role in the national liberation movements, training people who are fighting against apartheid South Africa. Don't believe a word you read from the German historians about the DDR. It's all basically revisionist garbage. So just don't believe a word they say. Actually, this is a really interesting question, because for me, the spirit of Bandung is not really in the BRICS. It's in the kinds of fights that are happening now in places like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, in the alliance of Sahel states. Because these governments, I mean, they are so brave. I traveled through these countries in 2018 and saw, women of all working class backgrounds, market women, women from rural areas, protesting against French military bases in 2018. And they forced the military to do the coups, to throw the French out. I mean, these people are so brave, and they are getting almost no support. Anybody who remembers Thomas Sankara fondly, anybody who fondly remembers Thomas Sankara must stand up for the people of Burkina Faso, the Burkinabe people, Malians, and the Nigerian people, and fight tooth and nail to prevent any attempt to overthrow these governments, because they are practically trying to build the spirit of Bandung in the central part of the Sahel. And every day they fear a military intervention by one of the neighboring countries, which will be backed by the French, the NATO powers, the United States. I always am afraid of NATO meetings, because I don't know what they decide there and then enact within weeks afterwards. Again, make sure you go to The Hague and etc.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for your answers. I don't know, Peter. No reaction.
I'm saving time.
Okay.
No, I want, okay.
No, because I feel
speak? I don't
I
know.
feel that in your book you mentioned that you talk a lot about the BRICS, for example, and I think that initially, for example, we thought that BRICS was more of an economic bloc, but now in the last summit that they had, we see that they started having more political declarations of, for example, condemning unilateral sanctions, affirming also a place at a seat on the UN Security Council. So I feel that we are seeing a bit of a shift of that BRICS is becoming not only an economic bloc, but also, a bit of a political alliance in terms of, but I don't know if it's too early to affirm such thing, or how do you see?
I'm not. The book I wrote was more about bring also to the idea of the book was very simple, to connect, to try to connect some dots, to try to connect class struggle in the global north and class struggle in the global south. And I know it's much more complicated than that, and there is a million of class struggles. That's why I use the word mutiny, because it's not a politicized class struggle, but it's the beginning of a resistance everywhere. And we have to start there. We cannot be nostalgic into a situation where the forces were on another level. Okay, we can learn from history, and we have to use history, but we are not in the same situation, neither in the countries in the south, but neither in the north. And that was the goal of the book. And referring to what Marc said at the beginning, I think, for example, for Europe now, like these three possible ways that that there is for Europe, either they will continue to follow the US, that is Mark Rutte inviting not only Trump to The Hague, Mark Rutte wanting to be the best pupil of forever. So following the United States is one way, and then there's the dominant way. But the second part that there is in Europe is, okay, we must be autonomous and we have to have our own army. But it is about recreating a new imperialist bloc in Europe. And so we are not not in favor of that kind too. So we have to create ourselves, I do think, a third alternative, a socialist Europe alternative, another society project. And in that kind, I do think that everything that is spirit of Bandung, everything that is liberation movement, everything that is Sahel countries liberating the Sahel, everything that is Honduras fighting against this new colonial, everything that is The Hague and South Africa, etc. It is not only important that the governments and the members of parliament, etc., has connecting with this liberation movement, but I do think so that in this third socialist way of seeing Europe, there must be a connection of every kind of struggle of the global side. So that's connecting the dots for me, and that's maybe more the spirit of Bandung to today than only having official relations with the BRICS, which we should have as Europe. Why should Germany break up with China? Why should Belgium break up? The European Union should have multilateral relation with every country and with the BRICS countries, but that's not enough. We have to recreate this third alternative movement. That's my point of view. Yeah, on page 12, no. $200.
Okay, so I would propose that we take a 10-minute break. So for those who want to use the toilets, stretch their legs, and we come back then in 10 minutes for the Q&A session where you're going to have time to pose your questions. Is that okay? 10 minutes? Well, so before jumping in to our questions, I would like to ask Vijay and Varsha, why are you here in Brussels? I mean, why did you come? And yeah, was it just to see the giant statue of Mannequin Piss, or was there any other particular reason?
I mean, what is that? It's just like it's rude, right? Why are you here? Why are you here? Go home. Always sounds better when you say go home in German. Oops. Well, actually, this is the 70th anniversary of the Bandung Conference, but we are approaching the 100th anniversary of a very important meeting that was held in Brussels. In 1927, revolutionaries from across Asia, Africa, Latin America, including from Puerto Rico, came to Brussels at the invitation of a very interesting group of people in Berlin, Willy Manzenberg, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, and so on, to create the League Against Imperialism. And that was in 1927. And we are part of an organizing committee to create a commemorative set of events from now till 2027 to commemorate 1927. At the beginning of the Bandung Conference, President Sukarno of Indonesia said, remember, many of you in the room, this is in 1955, were in Brussels in 1927. And that's where many of you first met each other. By the way, it's really interesting. While India was being partitioned into India and Pakistan, and before the Indian government had even set up state offices, India hosted an Asian Relations Conference in 1947. And the Asian Relations Conference of 1947 was held and hosted by India for solidarity with Indonesia, which even though it declared independence in 1945, was in the middle of a terrible war against the Dutch for independence. These countries really learned to love each other. And I really mean that word. On the way to Bandung, Nasser, Nehru stopped in Myanmar, in Burma. And, you know, they put on Burmese clothes, they cooked together. I mean, there's beautiful photographs of them. They loved each other, these people. And I think it's a real lesson for us I'm going to say it a different way. It's a lesson for us. You can't be a socialist if you don't love people. You know, you just can't be a socialist if you don't love people. And it's a lesson for us how much these countries learn to love each other. I really hope we can extract that during our 2 years of celebration of the League Against Imperialism. I hope we can extract that lesson and learn to love other peoples from different countries and not hate and fear them.
On this note, I would also like to thank also the presence of several conveners who came all the way to Brussels for the meeting, and so that we can start with our League Against Imperialism Centennial campaign. So a warm round of applause to Dr. Tlaling Mofokeng from South Africa. Baba Aye from Nigeria. Patricia and Carlos Ariza from Colombia. And Disha Jani from Canada, Germany. Now we can start the Q&A session. I would suggest that we do small blocks of 3 questions each time. We're gonna have the mics coming towards you. But please try to concise and brief so that we have as many questions as possible. I don't know who would like to, I have one hand here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the brilliant speeches and contributions. I want to ask whether I'm being over-optimistic when I think it looks to me as if we're approaching some tipping point, that imperialism just doesn't have the objective basis to boss the world like it used to. I saw an amazing figure the other day that at the beginning of this century, the GDP of the imperialist countries, the OECD, was almost five times as big as the rest of the world. Now it's only just over half as big again. You can boss people around if you're 5 times as big as them. If you're just only half, it's not the same. And it looks as if, the biggest imperialist powers, you talked about the Opium Wars. At that time, Britain and France could just walk into China and burn down the Summer Palace and without resistance, effective military resistance, because they wanted to buy things from China and they had nothing that China wanted to buy from them. Well, we're getting back to the same situation where we want things from China and we've got nothing that China needs from us because they make their own electric cars and soon it'll be wide-body jets and so on. But there's a big difference that now China has an army that they can't just march in and boss them around. It looks to me as if that'll be true in more and more of the world, and that America can't even completely boss around its 2 northern and southern neighbors. So that's the objective factors, but I suppose, am I being too optimistic? Because the subjective factors don't seem to be keeping up with that. So I'd wonder how you see the relation between those. Thank you.
Hi, just a really quick question. We're seeing NATO expanding beyond Europe. And really into the Pacific region. And I was wondering, what are the trends of, I guess, NATO militarization in the Asia-Pacific region you're seeing right now?
Hello. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I have a question. Do you think that a large part of the problem that we have in the global north of not understanding our situation is because people have lost touch with their material reality, because we don't know materialism, not theoretically, but also not practically, because our lives are too great, let's say. We live off the resources of the global south. Do we need to teach people what material reality really means? Thank you.
Not bad. Who would like to start? So we start with...
You want me to start? No, you go. Okay, maybe I'll answer one and then we go around. Thank you. Vijay is noting the questions for me because I've shown up on stage today with no pen or paper, either for my speech or for this Q&A. I wanted to maybe begin with the last one on whether populations in the global north, especially the working class in the global north, have lost touch with material reality. I actually disagree. I think it's the opposite, that now it's incredible to me when you look at rates of hunger, for example. I certainly grew up very much with the notion that Europe has multiple problems, but at least there's only a small sliver of the population that goes to bed hungry, that does not get even a single meal a day. That number has been rapidly increasing across Europe, and especially in Western Europe. The percentage of the population that's homeless, the percentage of population that goes to bed hungry, the percentage of population that simply does not have a paycheck that can last them more than 3 days of the week. It's incredible, right, that you're seeing this in the heart of Europe, which has accumulated wealth throughout history from our nations, and now people here are going to bed hungry. And why is that happening? You look at, I think many of you will remember when Ukraine happens, and instantly you see a 50% price hike in food prices across. And of course, every single government in the West declares this is because of Russia. Russia isn't sending out its wheat, the wheat basket of the world, the bread basket of the world, and prices have gone up. And this is all because of Ukraine. Turns out the whole thing was a lie. We now know, when we look at actual stats months later, that the supply of wheat coming out of Russia, even from day 2 of the war, actually changed only by the range is something like 0.7% to 1.2%, so nothing. But the price rose by 50%. What would explain that? That's explained by the fact that there's only 4 companies, what are called the evil ABCDs, ADM, Louis Dreyfus, Bunge, and Cargill, that control 80% of all agricultural production in the world. And that's what made it impossible for people, of course, here in Europe to buy their food, and made it incredibly unaffordable, with no change at all in the actual stocks of food. It went up simply and purely because of food speculation. Now, these 4 companies are the same companies that are actually killing land defenders amongst peasants in plantations across the global south. That's the connection that we need to make. The material reality of going to bed hungry is something that every single hungry person does know. But the fact that your alliance is not with the ruling class of your own country, but actually with the working classes of the global south, for whom the common enemy are, for example, in this case, the ABCDs, or a World Trade Organization system that allows for food speculation, that allows companies to make billions of dollars by letting people deliberately starve. That's the connection. That's the project that we all have to be invested in, which right now does not exist. If you look, just Google when you go home, biodiversity loss or food security reports. Every single report will give you long indices of which are the most food insecure countries, where there's almost a famine that's coming up, with absolutely no mention. And I do this is one of my hobbies to do, control F any company, right? Whether it's Cargill, Bunge, Louis Dreyfus, doesn't matter. Won't show up, 0 mentions. So countries are becoming food scarce, countries are becoming food insecure, and turns out there's going to be a famine. What's causing this famine? No one will tell you. It's like biodiversity loss has shown up, dropped from the sky, and suddenly affecting specific countries. So this obfuscation of who the enemy is precisely what divides the working class in the global north from the working class in the global south. And that, for me, is the political project that we need to really take on and seize to connect to the material reality of the wretchedness that we are all experiencing in our everyday life.
I'll do the Asia, NATO. That's the question I'll answer. It's interesting. The Indian foreign minister was asked last year whether India would like to join as a NATO partner. And he was asked this by a Western journalist. And his answer interested me a great deal. His name is Jaishankar. Comes from a long line of distinguished civil servants. His father was a pretty important ambassador. His brother is one of the best historians of early modern India. He was asked by a journalist, well, does India want to become a NATO partner? And he said in answer very calmly, we don't believe in the NATO mindset. I thought that answer was very instructive. We don't believe in the NATO mindset. Now, why is this important? Because for a very long time, the NATO countries, led by the United States, have wanted to behave like the world's policemen. Ever since the first out-of-area operation that resulted in the destruction of Yugoslavia in 1999, and then the war in Afghanistan, then NATO did not formally join the war in Iraq, but NATO provided logistical assistance for the illegal war in Iraq. And then NATO destroyed Libya in 2011. And ever since then, NATO countries have joined in the illegal freedom of navigation exercises that the United States runs off the coast of China. Why are those illegal? They're illegal because the freedom of navigation exercises are conducted based on a UN treaty called the Treaty on the Laws of the Sea. But the United States has never signed the treaty. So as a non-signatory of the treaty, it tries to exercise the treaty, which makes its actions illegal. Nobody seems to have taken the United States to task for this. At any rate, there has been a significant expansion of NATO assets into Asia. United States has 990 military bases around the world. Many of them are in Asia. I just want to give you one example of the ridiculousness of this whole thing. Australia, which for all practical purposes is an Asian country, Australia's largest trading partner in both directions is China. Australian ships carry Australian raw materials to China and bring back Chinese finished goods to Australia. That's the nature of the trade. Australian Navy patrols aggressively the sea route that allows Australian ships to take goods to China and bring goods from China to Australia. I mean, why would China disrupt sea lanes that benefits Australia and China? And yet Australia wastes its money patrolling the sea lanes with the United States. This is the nature of NATO plus countries in the Asia Pacific. Most of the Asian countries are members of RCEP, one of the world's largest trading blocs. And yet many of them are compelled under pressure from the United States to enter into a military pressure against China. So NATO doesn't have any formal role in Asia. There's an attempt to set up a NATO liaison office in Tokyo. I think in the end it's just going to be a door with a sign with an American retired officer sitting in there. Because I don't think they're really going to be able to build a formal NATO capacity in Asia. But they keep trying, and they're using NATO assets in a very dangerous provocation taking place in Asian waters. So your question is an excellent question. But you got to understand that from California all the way to the legal coastline of China, the United States has built an island chain, several chains of islands, which are threatening Asian countries. You know, when Noam Chomsky once gave an interview and he said, the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world is the United States government, it got headlines all over the place. So I called him up and I was like, Noam, you normally don't make jokes. You know, it's like a crazy statement, but Chomsky is always the scientist. He said to me, no, it's not a joke, it's a factual statement. The United States government has terrorized more people in the world than any other organization. Ipso facto, it is the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world.
On your question about objective and subjective situation, I do agree that we are in 2025, and what's happening in China, I think everyone has said it during this conference, everyone knows it. It is huge what's happening in China, and that's a game changer, a real game changer, certainly for the perspective also for people living in the global north, being used 500 years to look to the world from a Eurocentric perspective, etc. It is going to the global south, and it's a change. And so the course of history that China is developing itself as a power, it will not change. But I do think in this intermediate phase, it is not already the end game for the United States, because the United States will use this intermediate phase to try to do everything to safeguard his own hegemony over the world. So I think it will be a rather dirty phase we're heading to. I think the world in the next 5 or 10 years will be not such a nice place. And that's also reality. Because of, I think, like the Soviet Union and the United States, when you see the rivalry between both, it was intense, and the weapons, etc., etc. But the challenge that now China is waging on the United States is from another level. And I say it with all due respect for the Soviet Union, really with all due respect. But what the Chinese do now as a challenge, it's another level. So the war to control imperialism, American imperialism, will be brutal. Will be brutal, and we have to prepare. And it will be not nice, but then you come to the second question. In this period, in this phase, it can go either way. We can go into this in total destruction somewhere, somehow, or there can be forces everywhere in the world that are a little bit prepared for this situation. And I think we have to use this phase urgently everywhere to try to create groups, parties, inspiring for another world, and that's important. In 1831, at the beginning of capitalism, you had the brutal exploitation of the textile workers in Lyon, in France. And so it was brutal, and one time in Lyon, 1831, they chased all the bosses of Lyon. They took over the control of Lyon. Everyone has forgotten. 1831, Lyon. Workers took over. And then they had the power in Lyon. They had no clue what to do. They had no theory, they had no vision. So they reinstalled capitalist relationships in Lyon. So okay, resistance is one thing, even having power is one thing, but what is our vision for the world to become? And that's an important thing. And I do believe Naomi Klein when she said, in times of crisis, those who are the best prepared with an orientation have a length of advantage on all the other forces. And so we better get prepared everywhere, because in this turmoil, things will change rapidly. And I don't believe, for example, that's my personal opinion, that the left is everyone who is vaguely have some theory, we come all together. No, I do think really that we have to create some clarity on socialism, on liberation, and that you have to have a vision, a societal vision, a vision of society, a unity in a party, an organization, and then you can create, you have to build not only a train, but also a locomotive of history, a locomotive, and this is the time to do it. So yes, I do agree the subjective forces are not there, but there is a possibility in the next 5 or 10 years to create locomotives everywhere in the world to have this new vision, and because we don't want to be in the situation of the textile workers of Lyon and having a revolt and oh, what the fuck are we going to do? And now what are we going to do with the IMF? What are we going to do with NATO, etc.? So let's prepare.
Oh, sorry, I'm a bit nervous because I don't want to sound stupid, but
Brazilian, there's no reason to be nervous.
Thank you. Yeah, I was watching an interview with a speaker person for China. His name is Victor Gao, and the reporter asked him about the war in Ukraine, and he said about the influence of China providing warfare, provide like armament for Russia. And Victor Gao just answered that if China was really touching this war and supporting Russia, Ukraine would be a done game already. I would like to, I have a question, basically, this is a bluff from China, how powerful military is China, and how would be the nature of a war with China, because you see that warfare is shifting, we don't have more boots on the ground, it would be a Cold War, a cyber war, total annihilation of humankind. Yeah, I just would like to know your opinion about that.
Thank you. My question is like essentially situating the spirit of Bandung in today with a perspective of seeing the spirit of Bandung having worked sort of in tandem with what Ken Loach, the British film producer, described as the spirit of 45. You know, it is not, Keynesianism was an attempt, a reformist attempt to keep revolution, the genie of revolution, in the bottle. Similar to what the creation of the ILO was, and I'm happy it's there in black and white, that it was created largely with the specter of the Russian Revolution, you know. So, what I'm going to is this. We want, and unambiguously, we fight for revolutionary transformation of the world. But just as I was saying earlier, it's like if you are in hell and you try to negotiate for a colder place in hell, the devil realizes that you are not serious. But when you fight like hell to get out of hell, even if you don't get out of hell, then he's ready to negotiate for a fan or an air conditioner somewhere for you there. And that's exactly what happened with the post-World War II social compromise. Now, within the context of the here and now, what would anti-imperialist and you can't be anti-imperialist without being anti-capitalist, and you can't be anti-capitalist without being anti-imperialist. What would that mean here in the West? You know, in light of the current neoliberal global order, you know, with things like, you know, during the COVID-19, when we were talking about the issue of TRIPS waiver, but, you know, what does that mean concretely for, how do you hold the feet of the ruling class here to the fire, both on behalf of the working class here and the workers of the world, including in the global south? Thank you.
Hi, so I am a student in conflict and development, and I have a master's thesis to write that I have to hand in soon. And so I recently changed my topic, and I have to hand in August. And so I wanted to write it about the role of China in the construction of something new, something that could be indeed the spirit of Bandung, of something that is called tilting world order, or a new mood, or multipolar world, that the Chinese call it themselves. And I was wondering how you guys see this, what you guys think that the main axes are of the China's role in this shifting new world order. And I also have a more specific question, but I don't know if we have time for this, so you can ignore it if you want to. But I also have a question on the construction of a new development theory for the Global South, which was one of the dossiers in January of the Tricontinental. And I feel like there is maybe not necessarily a contradiction, but a tension between what China is saying themselves about their own development theory, where they say that they have no model, and that you guys with the Tricontinental are trying to put a model on the Chinese model. And I was wondering how, you guys view this, trying to see a pattern in crossing the stones, crossing the river by feeling the stones. So I was wondering what you think of that.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Wendell. And I like this meeting we're doing. It's a very nice thing. The spirit of Bandung, if you go and you search for it, you come across a lot of information about decolonization, freedom, and all in that content. But my question now is, when we are talking about peace, I think to have peace, it goes along with the, how you say it, forgot the word. In the Netherlands is the sacrifices that needs to be made to have peace. Yeah. What does the spirit of Bandung do on that subject? The sacrifices that need to be made to have peace. Because we are always talking about we don't want war, ending war. What is going now with the financial structures that are being put together to have war. But the understanding, the mindset of having peace, what goes along with that I haven't heard yet. And I'm asking myself, like, is the whole Europe, the whole world, the whole sphere among the spirit of Bandung, if they have an explanation to the people of the world, how we can regain, the concept of having peace, how we can gain that, how we can get that. That's my question.
You want me to go? Okay, so the first thing I have to say is that the information is classified. If I knew the strength of the Chinese military, I couldn't tell it to you right now. Or if I would tell it to you, I'd have to destroy everybody here. But one thing is very clear, is that I don't think, it's not only China, I don't think the countries of the South want to go through the history of colonialism again. You know, you see films made in China which have taught generations about the century of humiliation, about the opium wars, etc. Nobody wants to go through that again. Nobody. You talk to Palestinians who have been bombed and are being bombed and starved. They don't want to go through yesterday again. So people will defend themselves and have a right to defend themselves. If defending themselves means to defend themselves against being sent back into a century of humiliation. I am not a pacifist. I don't want to surrender in the face of imperialist aggression. I would rather die than be enslaved by them. There were a group of Africans who were brought on a ship. When they arrived in Virginia, in the United States, as enslaved, as commodities, they were chained together. They were taken off the ship. Then they turned around and they walked in a straight line into the Atlantic Ocean and drowned themselves. Because what they were saying is the human spirit is too great to tolerate humiliation. They couldn't fight because they had been chained. But if you're not yet chained, you will fight to defend your right to be dignified. And in a sense, that's sacrificing. Nobody wants a war with the United States. No, none of us want to go to war with the dragon. They can fly over our cities and burn them down. We don't want a war with them. But we are not going to surrender. You see, Japan had its hands in handcuffs in 1985 when the United States forced Japan to upwardly revise the yen in the Plaza Accord. Then 10 years later, they forced Japan to again revise their currency in the Reverse Plaza Accord. For the last 15 years, the United States has asked the Chinese to upwardly revise their currency. The Chinese have said no, because that will stop our development. Our commitment is to end the suffering of the Chinese people. That's what Mao Zedong meant when he said the Chinese people have stood up. Nobody wants a war. But if they impose a war, we have the right to defend ourselves. And you know, I know when in these circles amongst people like ourselves, none of us is interested in fighting a war. You know, when the Europeans say we'll make an army, who's going to go fight? Which among you is going to join the Belgian army to go and be part of a big European crusade? None of you. But you will defend the working class if it's attacked. You will join in the defense of the working class if it is attacked. If there is a class war upon the people, you will be there. You will refuse to allow the working class to be humiliated. That countries are doing. Now, I can't tell you how many ships and how many planes, because that information is not possible. But people will defend themselves. When it comes to the new development theory, look, it is true that after decades of the Washington consensus, where Washington has said, everybody, this is the recipe, follow it. If you follow this recipe, you will develop. And nobody developed. I believe that many countries, Indonesia, China, many countries are uncomfortable with saying they are a model. Because nobody wants a model. We have already had enough experience of models. We've had it up to here. There's a good reason why there's no Beijing consensus. In fact, the term Beijing consensus was coined by a US scholar. The term the Chinese model was coined by a Harvard University professor. Nobody in China wants to coin any model because the global south is fed up with being told how to do things. On the other hand, there are lessons to be learned. Professor Meng Jie at Fudan University has got a new book coming out. One of the brightest scholars who studies the Chinese economy looks for patterns, theories. You have to extract theories and patterns from each other. How did the landless workers movement in Brazil, in their settlements, end hunger? Can we take those lessons to Belgium? How did the people in Burkina Faso in the 1980s compel men to start doing housework? Can we take that lesson to India? How did the Chinese develop new technologies, breaking the bottleneck? What was Renminbi 200 billion? What was that project? We can learn lessons from each other, but we have to abstract a theory, a new development theory. You see, right now we are being forced to accept the IMF, the FMI, the International Monetary Fund's theory. We have to produce alternative, real development theories for the South. If we don't do it, then you have exactly what happened in Peter's story. You take power, but you don't know what to do the next day. In fact, at our institute, Tricontinental, we are developing a booklet called The First 100 Days of Power. We're going to put that up as a PDF online in like 20 languages. You win an election, go have a read of our booklet. First chapter is on take care of the military and the police. Be careful of those guys, because that's where you have your first problem. You think the real issue is economics? I'm telling you it's over there. Change all the generals immediately. That's the kind of money laundry, the laundry that you need to run. Get rid of the generals, the police chiefs, and so on. Yeah, it's okay to politicize the police. They're already political. Yeah, I agree that other institutions shouldn't be politicized. But the police is always political. It's okay to politicize them. Yeah, you got to do that. So you need a theory for that. If we don't have a theory of tomorrow, we'll reproduce today forever. We need a theory for tomorrow. Socialism is our ideal, but socialism isn't necessarily a full worked out theory. It's what we call tomorrow. Socialism is another word for tomorrow. That's what we dream about. That's what we're trying to build today. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of building socialism, you need a theory. Old man Marx did a solid critique of capitalism. If only he had drunk a little less and lived another 20 years, he might have written that book on the state and helped us properly understand how to smash the state and build socialism. But he really liked his drinking. And he suffered terribly from boils. Socialism is our word for tomorrow, but we need a theory. And we need every one of you to participate in building that theory.
Thanks for that, Vijay. One of the things that I hear most often on every single trip, in every single project at the Progressive International is, oh, we're so glad to know that we're not alone. When I tell stories like Zimbabwe, like Honduras, like that of South Africa, of these punishments which are fundamentally about isolating countries, isolating people, isolating institutions, and really making you feel like you're alone in this world, and the only other option is for you to capitulate, is for you to bend over to survive. And so the most powerful feeling, if we may, is to know that you're not alone, that there are others along with you in this. The last time that we all collectively, and really the entire world, experienced that we aren't in this alone, we are actually all of us on the same side, was the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think many of us have really memory hold this experience, given how absolutely horrendous it was. But this was the spirit, right? Every single headline at the time said, this is a war. This is a war of the virus against the world. For the first time, scientific institutions from the east to the west, from the global north to the global south, they're all working together, and we're going to find a common solution. Turns out that wasn't the case. We weren't actually on the same side at all. Every single time that there was ever an experiment to have a common plan, to have a common vision, as we talk about what is this vision for the world, faced with a real common enemy of the COVID-19 virus, with a very clear understanding that there was no way to eradicate it in specific countries. And that was the difference between this virus versus all the others, which really was seen as ones that affected only the poor countries. You know, have you ever heard the term neglected tropical diseases, which is quite a big category in medical sciences? I always found it really funny, because neglected by whom? Surely not by the people who are afflicted by these diseases, which turns out is 76% of the world. So there's certainly not neglected diseases for the 76% of the world. They're neglected in the institutions in the West, which really define how we think about knowledge and how we think about the world as a whole. Anyway, coming back to the virus, it's when the vaccine was discovered, the New York Times ran this headline that said, finally, we're doing science differently. We're all going to have one world vaccine. Turns out that was a lie. You had vaccine hoarding, you had vaccine apartheid, and this was despite our attempt to seize every single institution at our disposal. Within the first few weeks of the scientific discoveries, you had a proposal in the World Health Organization of what's called the CTAP, or a simple pooling mechanism. The idea went, any of us in any country, any research institute discovers vaccine technology, we're going to share it with the world, no patent. No one's giving somebody else money. Each government just is able to pick from this pool the technology and go produce life-saving vaccines for itself. It was introduced by Costa Rica, and it gathered dust without any other country supporting it for months on end. Set aside, then you had a second proposal 8 months in at the World Trade Organization, this time to say, fine, maybe pooling technologies is a bit too radical, no one wants to do that, let's have a temporary waiver. If someone discovers a vaccine technology, just for a few months, let's not have it be under patent, and each of us produce vaccines in our countries, and then we go back to the for-profit system, Big Pharma continues to make its profits, just for these few months, let's have a waiver. This was introduced by India and South Africa, and then eventually gathered support by 124 countries, all from the global south, and kept getting vetoed in a total of 32 sessions by a handful of nations, by the European Union and the United States and Canada. And it fails we don't have a patent waiver for COVID-19 vaccines. In the meantime, global North countries have accumulated vaccines to the tune of 3 doses per citizen, even in the developing world. In Africa, for example, 3% of the entire continent was vaccinated, 97 waiting for even a single jab, and at the same time being forced to repay their debts. During the 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, the entire African continent paid more still in debt servicing, including to private creditors, to banks like JP Morgan Chase, than they spent on their health infrastructure and health service on the continent. Still, absolutely no change. You have other countries come up and say, fine, multilateral systems aren't working, we'll produce vaccines ourselves, we're going to issue compulsory license. We figured out how to make the vaccine. We've bought a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we figured it out, we're going to reverse engineer it. This is what Bolivia did and said, we're going to do this now. And Canada comes in and threatens them with billions of dollars in fines and stops a factory that's at the point of production and says, no, actually, you have to remain idle. You cannot produce vaccines. Then you have yet another infrastructure, which is COVAX, which is led by Bill Gates, supposedly the savior of apparently all the poor in the world, bringing healthcare to developing countries everywhere, who comes out and says, no, not governments, surely they can't be the ones to be running healthcare. I'm going to be the one that runs healthcare. Let's set up a completely private model called COVAX, and I decide where vaccines go. And as we know now, he's the one who convinces Oxford University, who comes up with the AstraZeneca vaccine, to not make it public, who had decided to make it open source, and he convinces them, coerces them using $750 billion that he has, $1 million that has as endowment and donation to the Oxford University to say, actually, you should keep it under patent. And 12 months later, the same dose that sold for $2 in the United Kingdom is sold at $7 a jab to Uganda and to every other country in the African continent. Again, why am I telling you all of these examples? Is to say, of course, we need a theory, but we also need infrastructure. There is absolutely, in this moment today, no infrastructure for global South countries and the people of the global South to fight, even in this instance, just simply for their right to survive. It's a scandalous. Imagine a humanitarian aid outfit coming up in the middle of a global emergency, claiming that they will be the ones to issue vaccines to people, do not do so for 2 years on end, and then when they finally do so, send out expired doses or sell them at 4 times the price. And it's not a scandal. There's been no investigation into COVAX whatsoever. There's been no investigation into Bill Gates. And in fact, to the opposite, you have people like Angela Merkel come up and they have the gall to say India should stop producing vaccines for its own population and send it to us because we, Germany, let India's pharmaceutical industry develop. It's because of us that they have their pharmaceutical industry, and how dare they? Because India at this point said, no, we can't export any vaccines to Germany because we've got a lot of people. If anyone knows anything about India, we've got to vaccinate our own population. And Angela Merkel has the gall to come out and say, how dare you, we let you develop. So what we need is real Southern infrastructure. Just as you have Paris clubs that enforce creditors, enforce ratings in crippled countries, we need to have our own debtors union, where collectively countries of the global South say, we refuse to pay debt. This is not our debt to pay, and we refuse to continue servicing the pockets of the oligarchs in each of these global North countries. We need to have our own currency, as there are experiments underway right now in West Africa, in South America, currency of the Sur, for example, the attempts to get rid of the West African franc. These are active experiments to finally, once and for all, wrench free from the control of the North. West African countries, including Senegal, had to, until 2 years ago, save 20% of their foreign reserves in a bank in France, in Paris, at the Central Treasury, by law, something that was changed 2.5 years ago, not 20 years ago, and certainly not 6 years ago when they finally became free and independent. So for us, as we think about what does this tomorrow look like? For me, it also looks like being extremely serious about the technologies, about the infrastructure that we as the people of the South need in place of these wretched institutions that we have now, which have clearly not, forget delivering for us, but have actively been engaged in this process of vengeance and violence against the people of the South. Thank you.
Yeah. The question of Baba and socialism in Europe or in the North. I think the first thing is the question about power. Who has the power? Like, there were two. I do agree with Lenin, but if you study all the movements in history about attempts to take power, he said, okay, periods of change, periods of revolutions and attempts to take power, they occur when those on top can't handle the situation anymore, and when those below won't accept the situations anymore. And there's a global sociological idea about situation. And in Europe we had, after World War I, after the massacre of World War I, this situation. And we had huge revolutionary movements in Italy, 2 years, Biennio Rosso, Turin, Milan, all the fact 100,000 armed workers and soldiers coming back with their arms, waging a revolution, smashed down by fascism. We had it in Germany. It was 100,000 councils, armed councils, in the revolution in Germany. It didn't succeed. In Hungary, the council, etc. There was a huge attempt to install socialism by taking and grasping power here in Europe. And the only place where it succeeded was in Russia. And they said, okay, it was the weakest link. Okay, that was one part of the answer. Because the other part of the answer was, in Russia there was a well-organized party with a vision. It wasn't there in Italy. It was too young, too early in Germany, but it was present in Russia. Okay, that's one lesson we can learn about it. How to organize, how to prepare, and how to think on a more long term for all this. After World War II, you were referring to the spirit of 45 and what Ken Loach, the brilliant movie of Ken Loach of the spirit of 45. But after World War II, in my opinion, there was no revolutionary situation. There was already a division, and there was the idea that the Communist Party of France and the Communist Party of Italy some way should be in the system and act as at the same time as a managing party and as a counterparty of the system. It ended finally in Euro-communism, and it failed also. We can have it, and I say that with all due respect for the French Communist Party and for the Italian, because we can learn a lot of both parties. But there was a second period. Now we are in a third phase. We are entering in third phase, maybe again with war. When they succeed in sending 300,000 youngsters towards the Ukrainian front, it will be a disaster. No one wants it, and Vijay is right. Like, they are now for 1 year in the German schools trying to recruit pupils and students for the army. They don't succeed. Luckily, they don't succeed. But maybe they will force a new generation to join the army. I will say that the times are changing rapidly. Europe has no vision, but because even the militarization of Europe will not bring happiness, will not bring prosperity for the working class in Europe. So I do think that the clashes that there will be in Europe will be clashes on things like housing, on things like jobs, on things like which industrial plan has Europe, on things like climate change, etc. All on things like feminism and the rights of everyone. All these different axes of struggle, they will at one point hurt at the limit of the capitalist system. If you manage to wage a struggle like on feminism or on anti-racism or on housing, on jobs, if you wage a struggle to the end, you will reach the limit of capitalism. And at that point, if we can create, if there is an organization that is able to create a convergence of all this struggle, we can tipple the situation. And last point, Baba, I do think there will be not such thing as socialism only in Europe. like Vijay said, I do agree, the working class today is also international in Europe. And luckily, there is a lot of struggle traditions entering Paris, entering Berlin, entered London, entered Brussels, etc. And it's intertwined. There will be no phase of Euro-communism, of Euro-socialism again. It won't work. To imagine only a socialist Europe. It is connected because we are waging a war against the same enemies like Varsha said. It's the same ABCDs, it's the same medical companies, it's the same Amazons and technical, it's the same enemy. And so every struggle waged in Brazil or in India or wherever, or in Nepal against these monopolies will also be used, can be used, I will say, by working class here. It's the same. So I do think also our vision on socialism in Europe, it is possible, it is necessary, but it will be from the beginning on international. And that's why I'm very happy, as a closing word, that in 2027 we will organize together the Centennial of the League of Anti-Imperialism here in Brussels. So it will be a converging point of all these struggles.
Well, unfortunately, we have reached to the end of this conference. I hope you enjoyed it and then you have a bit of a more hopeful feeling to get organized, to change the society that we're living in. And for those who want to continue the conversation, we are going to Café Bebo, if I'm right. So you're more welcome to join. Thank you everyone for being here. I would also like to thank the organizers for making this happen, and also the interpreters, because after all, they're the ones who are spreading the message that we have been discussing today to everyone in the room. So thank you very much. And also, I would like to thank the representatives from different embassies from countries from the Global South tonight. So yeah, thank you very much.